Welcome to Pacific Mammal Research's Marine Mammal Highlight Series. We are a 501c3 research and education nonprofit studying marine mammals in the Salish Sea off Washington State. In this series, you will learn about different marine mammals as we discuss interesting facts about each species. This is our way to geek out, share some information, and have some fun. We hope you enjoy the series, and be sure to follow us on Instagram to vote for which animal we talk about next. And without further ado, welcome to the PacMam podcast. I'm Cindy.
And I'm Kat.
And this episode is a marine mammal highlight. And thank you to all who voted on our Instagram story and Facebook story. It was a close one. It was like 52 to 48%. It was between the Burmeister porpoise and the Waddell seal. And I'm kind of surprised that the Burmeister won.
I am and I'm not, because I feel like we've done the Waddell seal before and it was the same thing where I think like a porpoise that no one's heard of is a little bit more like, ooh, what's that?
Yeah, that's true. And this is the one porpoise that we haven't done yet out of all the 7 species that we have of porpoises. And we don't know a whole lot about it, which we'll get into, but there is some fun stuff that we're going to talk about. And they're really kind of weird looking, if you ask me.
Yeah, they're cool looking, but yeah, they're definitely a little bit oddly proportioned.
Yes, exactly. So with that, I'll let Kat get into what they look like, and we'll start from there.
Yeah. So first of all, let's talk about where we find these guys. So the Burmeister's porpoise are native to South America, and typically they're found within 50 kilometers of shore. So they do prefer the shallower coastline. And basically, if you envision South America, they're effectively found from northern Peru on the Pacific side, all the way down to southern Brazil on the Atlantic side. So kind of their range goes basically down and around the whole coast of South America.
It looks like lipstick, like on lips.
It kind of does. Yeah, it's true. And I will say that pretty much everything I looked at did note that it's really hard to know whether their range is continuous over this whole area or whether they have like little spots in here. Basically, it's really hard to see these guys in the wild for many reasons, which we'll get into, I'm sure, in many different ways.
Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit about that patchy or not patchy in the behavior and diet part. So it's hard to tell.
Yeah, exactly. There was one thing that I found that said that the Atlantic and Pacific populations may actually be distinct from one another, which would kind of make sense because that's a really long way to travel if you're a porpoise.
And there's some physical differences between. I think the Pacific side is bigger, if I remember.
I think some of them have been found to be bigger. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, slightly. And I'll get into that a little bit more when we talk about the status closer to the end, but there are potentially some more isolated populations of Burmeister's porpoises as well.
I'll talk about that too.
Okay, yeah. So it's basically they're kind of in South America. Where exactly in South America might be a little bit unsure, but we do know where there are some hotspots of them for sure.
Yes.
They are, however, thought to be slightly more common in Pacific waters.
Yeah, which is interesting, and I'll make a note about. I'll talk about that when I talk about the differences between the Atlantic and the Pacific.
Ooh, okay, interesting, intriguing. And that particular source that I found was noting that was because they prefer the colder, shallow waters and estuaries. So because of this, we don't really have a great count for population numbers. So
that's for sure.
Some researchers have estimated around about 500 individuals. I saw one that I think was an older site that said something about 10,000. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's not accurate, especially given all of the other information that we have about these guys, which is suggesting.
I didn't, in all my research, I didn't see any.
I found a couple, and I'm pretty sure the 10,000 was very outdated because they are threatened. So, spoiler alert. So, we don't really know. Basically, we really have not a great idea of how many there are, unfortunately. So in terms of what they look like, they are a dark gray to black in color. They have slightly lighter streaking on the chin and belly area. They're about 5 feet in length. So they get up to between 110, 165 pounds.
So they're kind of in between the vaquita and the harbor porpoise, kind of. Although the harbor porpoise is technically the second smallest.
Yeah, I think they're bigger than harbor porpoise.
Okay.
Because harbor porpoise is like 5 to 5.5 feet at like large.
Pounds. Yeah.
Right. So these guys, I think, probably get bigger than harbor porpoise. So I think it was on average about 5 feet in length, but you know, you have ones that are
they could be beefier too. Like
their body shape is a little different. And they do, in addition to just having that kind of dark gray color overall, they do have slightly darker patches around their eyes, their lips, and then they do have a little stripe that goes kind of from their chin to their flipper, which is asymmetrical and can vary with individual.
I know. I thought that was so cool.
Isn't that neat?
They know that, and they don't know a lot about individuals or anything.
I know.
But a lot of it's from stranding, so I guess that would make sense. They would be able to see that pretty soon.
A lot of it's from strandings and from just generally dead animals, which we'll talk about in the threats.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. But
yeah.
I thought it was interesting too that one of them is straighter and the other one is more. I saw at one place that curvaceous.
Okay, have a curvaceous line.
Oh yes, apparently one side's more curvaceous than the other.
How interesting. Does it? Are they sided with that? Like, is it typically that the left side is more curvaceous or the right side is more curvaceous?
You know,
or does it?
I'm not sure.
It like consistent asymmetry.
Yeah, because like they have that like with I think it's like minkies and stuff too, right? That there are one of the baleen whales. They have asymmetric, but I think it's the same on each side as asymmetric. You know which side it is. I remember there being one like that. I don't know if it was a minkie. It might have been somebody else. But I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if they know.
Yeah,
or if
I don't know either.
They have a big enough sample size to know.
It's true. So one of the weird things about these guys is their dorsal fin. Yes. So it's really weird. If you're watching on YouTube, we will put a picture of it up on the screen so you can take a look. But if not, go Google Burmeister's porpoise because their dorsal fin is like 3/4 of the way along their back. It's like the furthest back of any delphinid or
it looks like a baleen whale in that it's exactly that far back.
Yeah. Yep, and it's very, as one source put it, it says it raises at a shallow angle, so it's very shallow to the body, and then kind of has like a very straight back edge or slightly convex trailing edge.
It looks like somebody stepped on them, like stepped on the dorsal fin. Like, but I mean, it
looks squished. It does look a bit. Yeah. You know what? I was thinking it was almost like, I guess that's because I've just been sailing, but it reminded me of a sail that like kind of
it's like coming down
or something. That's like as it's like being lowered down.
Yeah, if you put like one of your like those little hand fans, you know, if you put it and just started closing it like that and then stuck it on the back of the porpoise, it's that shallow. Right. Yeah, it doesn't go up; it goes like that. Yeah.
Right. Exactly, and that's the thing. Porpoises typically have very triangular fins, so these guys are definitely kind of weird looking. And then in that they do have tubercles, which I have a very hard time saying. We were talking about this before we started recording. I was like, how do you say this word?
I always say it like I thought it was tubercles. No, I'm not even saying it right. That's with
I know. Anyway, they're small rounded nodes, basically, is what they are. And those are found on the leading edge of the fin. And this actually prompted their names, both Latin and common names, which we will get to in the fun facts. So stay tuned for that because I'm not going to give that one away because it's pretty fun.
And there are, I'm excited for that. There are a few different species that have these tubercles, and I think many of the porpoise species do, but they're not very prominent. There's like a couple of them. This one, it looks like the top of their dorsal fin and a little bit onto their back looks like a serrated knife. Like it's, they're quite distinct.
I'm really excited for the fun facts. Because like you said, it's not that these are unique to Burmeister's porpoise, but they are very prominent on the Burmeisters for some reason.
Yeah.
Which again, why? I'm so curious as to why that would be.
I don't think we really understand what they're for in the first place.
I don't think so. I haven't read anything that explains what their purpose is, if they have a purpose at all.
I remember reading one paper for probably another porpoise species that had some thoughts about what they're for. But now I can't remember what they were. But still, it was like, maybe.
Right. If anybody knows what tubercles are for on a porpoise, let us know.
Let us know, please, because we're intrigued and we have no idea.
Right. And then the last thing I had for their appearance is that they have 10 to 23 spade-shaped teeth on the upper row of their teeth and about 14 to 23 on the lower row. So potentially slightly more on the lower row, potentially, which kind of makes sense because that's usually the, in terms of grabbing things, that might be the one that would be requiring to have slightly more latching on.
I wonder how small they are compared to like the harbor porpoise and Dall's porpoise teeth.
Oh, good. Yeah, good question. I mean, they're obviously spade shaped, but I'm not sure. Yeah. I didn't see any images that were like compared to other things.
Yeah, I guess they would be small. But just for that, so remember, for our listeners, the spade shaped teeth are in porpoises, and dolphins have cone shaped teeth. That's one of the differences between dolphins and porpoises.
So yeah, that was all I had for their distribution and appearance. We want to jump over to their diet and behavior.
So since we just talked about teeth, I'm going to talk about food because we literally know barely anything about their food.
Wow.
So So feeding, all I can find is that they're pretty sure based on stomach contents. Like I said, much of this information is from strandings and other killed animals like the cat will get into. But all I could find is basically they're like, they eat squid and shrimp and anchovies, hake and other demersal, which means bottom fish, and pelagic, which means more open water fish. So that's pretty general.
Kind of anything,
like,
right?
they
Yeah.
eat fish. They have noted that animals off of Chile have been known to eat mollusks as well. So octopus,
Wow.
snails, things like that. So could be some differences between populations, which we'll kind of talk about too in other sections. But that's really all we could get from feeding. Nothing.
Short and sweet.
Short and sweet. That's pretty much what we got. So as Kat alluded to, these guys are really inconspicuous at the surface. They are hard to see. And on top of that, their dorsal fins don't come up out of the water, right? They slant back. So, you know, sometimes when we see the harbor porpoises, they barely come out of the water and their dorsal fins barely even look like they're there. So if they were squished down, it would almost be like having a dorsal fin surfacing at the water. So they're very inconspicuous, very little disturbance. So spotting them is even harder than other inconspicuous species like harbor porpoises. So basically you have to have calm water. And around South America, a lot of that water is not calm.
I was thinking that, like, that would be very tricky there.
Just a little bit. So there really aren't a lot of wild sightings, honestly. Like the information we have from it are on very limited observations of actual porpoises in the water, which is very interesting. So they are very hard to see. And so it was very similar to harbor porpoises, right? In the way that they surface really calmly, they can be really low to the water. They're just hard to see, but they're even worse than harbor porpoises. So I would not want to try to do photo ID on these guys. So they are like porpoises in that they are in groups, small groups of usually 1 to 2, up to 6. I saw up to 10 is uncommon, but they've seen up to 70, and I'll talk in a minute about some bigger, or in the new research, I'll talk about some other sightings that have been seen, but very similar to our porpoises here. Smaller groups tend to be the way that they go. So I saw a lot of things where they rarely breach, but I'm wondering, is that simply because we don't see them very often? I mean, we thought that porpoises don't breach that much, but they do more than we thought now that we're out there watching them. So it's possible that they don't, but it's also possible it's just because we don't have enough wild observations.
Yeah, I think that's an important caveat for a lot of the behavioral stuff, probably, is just that it really is so difficult to know because there have been so few observations.
Exactly. So as Kat was alluding to, they are thought to prefer cold and shallow waters. And cold is like 17 to 18 degrees Celsius, which I should have done the Fahrenheit conversion.
That seems not that cold to me.
I know.
17 to 18 degrees?
Yeah. And everything that said that's cooler waters.
I guess, yeah, I mean, it's probably like 50s into the 60s.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's about
like
our water.
Yeah, 17 to 18 is like quite nice summer weather in Shetland. Yeah. So well, probably like low to high 60s, I would guess. Yeah. Okay. Once you get into the 20s, I think it's into like the mid 70s here.
Okay, that makes sense. But I mean, that's about the temperature we have here is 55 degrees. For purposes, so
yeah, maybe slightly warmer, but
yeah, and
not by much.
It probably depends on they may be saying that's cooler when you're at the higher latitude, since this is on the southern hemisphere. As you get closer to the equator, that would be warmer, so that would actually be cooler for them in relation.
Right. Well, and also coastal waters obviously do warm up.
Yes.
More than offshore waters anyway.
Right. So yes, when the shallow waters are cooler like that, it would make sense.
Yeah.
So usually they're found 100 to 1,000 meters from shore, and about 5 to 25 meters deep. Usually less than about 50 meters, so less than about 150 feet, something like that. But off of Argentina, there have been some that have been captured in 30 to 60 meter water and 50 kilometers from shore. So
whoa.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that's on the Atlantic side. And so that may have to do with the fact that the continental shelf is much longer on the Atlantic side. And so they can be found farther offshore because it's still more shallow. So the geography
makes total sense. See, this is where, again, taking that like whole picture approach where it's like, wow, that's really weird. That's like totally abnormal for the species. And then you actually look at the oceanography of it. You're like, oh, it makes total sense.
Right. Well, it's still shallow water there. So
Right.
It's not
That's
just
really
a
cool.
blanket, like they're in within this meter of shore. Like it has to do with what's
Yeah.
below the water. And in the northern parts of the range, they have been seen offshore in 1,000 meters of water, so very deep. So I think it a lot depends on what's down there and where they are in their location around in the Atlantic and the Pacific.
Well, and I would also hazard a guess that, like you were saying earlier, you know, if they're so difficult to see, especially once you get out into that deeper water, just the swell, the waves are going to be, wave action is going to be a lot larger. Maybe it's possible their range is further than we think. We just can't see them out there.
Yeah, and I'll have some more in the new research about even farther things.
Right.
Yeah, so
Perfect.
it's very cool. It's like builds on each other. Let's see. So
love it when it comes together.
I know, right? It all connects. They do think that the population is bigger in the Pacific coast, which is interesting because you would think the Atlantic might be bigger because the shelf is larger, but you know, but they thought maybe they have to compete more with other species on the Atlantic side, where on the Pacific side, this is the main species within that same kind of niche or size. So they have to do with that.
Right.
They have also been seen in bays, in estuaries, channels, and fjords. So again, they like to be closer to the coast. However, there was one kind of is in a paper, but it was one that was not documented by or confirmed by like trained researchers or citizen scientists. But it was said that they saw two animals that were documented 18 kilometers upstream under the Pedro de Valdivia Bridge in downtown Valdivia.
Wow.
Yeah. So
well, that's weird.
Yeah, if that's a true one, it may be, you know, two weirdos that decided to veer off course. But it's unconfirmed is what if that was. So it's possible they go to the rivers, but we don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I saw one thing said that they may move closer to shore at night. The seasonal movements are interesting. Again, we don't know a lot. They've been seen and captured in all seasons, so I think it's similar to porpoises where they're there all the time, but there may be some bigger and smaller, you know, when they're in certain places, higher abundance or higher sightings. In Argentina and Chile, they have documented seasonal movements, and in southern Chile, they've connected those more to following prey, more than the other ones are just like, okay, we see them in different seasons.
Right.
So I think there is, and I'll talk a little bit in a minute. I think there's differences in sightings with seasons, which will link to prey and reproduction, and you know that kind of all that stuff together, which makes sense. This kind of went with diet, or like behavior, but somehow they have a fasted recorded speed of 4 kilometers per hour. And they often breathe 7 to 8 times and then dive for 3 minutes and then can come up as much as 50 feet away. So it sounds very similar to harbor porpoises.
Harbor porpoise, yeah.
They don't really generally do 7 to 8 times, but maybe 3 to 5. But you know, go down and then come back up somewhere else that does not help for pictures. They do seem to be pretty skittish around boats. So if boats approach, they do pretty much scatter. So it makes it even more difficult to observe them.
Makes sense.
And they can identify, I only saw one reference to this and I couldn't find like anything deeper. They can identify them by respiration sounds at the surface. So
so that they have like a distinguishable exhale?
I guess. I mean, I don't know if that just means like harbor porpoises where they're so loud that you can be like, oh, there's something there, or it's like, oh, that's specifically a Burmeister porpoise because it's got that weird rasp to it, you know. I don't know.
Good question.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting, but then I couldn't find anything further on it. So maybe
and that it might just be more like the porpoises where they do have a loud exhale, and so you don't see anything else except for you hear the blow.
Right, exactly.
Potentially. How interesting.
And then so even though I'm going to talk about acoustics later, that's going to be about click detection. As far as I know, that no underwater sounds have been reported for these porpoises.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, so we don't know. We can register when they're there by doing the click detectors that detect when the echolocation clicks are, but we don't know what they sound like. So it's interesting. So the last thing I'll talk about is reproduction. Gestation is about 11 to 12 months, and one thing I saw 10 months, so I put 10 to 12, somewhere around there. The population in northern Peru calves mostly in late summer to early fall. but I'm really confused on this because of the opposite seasons.
Right. I was going to say, are they doing like Southern Hemisphere fall?
So I have two different things, and it's confusing. So they have a pregnant female with a late-term fetus that was found in Uruguay in late February.
Okay,
and
that
so
would
this
be
plus,
their...
so that would be their summer.
Yes.
Summer is February to March.
Summer into fall. Summer into fall, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, transitioning.
So this plus other researchers believe that they mate from June to September, calving in May through August.
Which is like their winter.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Which is weird.
Huh.
And then another one says they suggest a peak of conception and parturition when they have babies in summer, which is February and March, which is not what they said in the other one. And pregnant females were recorded year round, and mating may take place in the summer. So,
right. That's really well. And again, I mean, unfortunately, just speaks to how little we know about them, right? Yeah. Where there's not really been any good observations to determine when this is actually happening. And I would imagine, I mean, their range is massive. Like if you look at the different areas that they could be found.
Oh yeah, the southern tip of South America is going to be very different than the northern part of South America.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it might even be like it varies with location, you know?
Well, you know, almost like the harbor seals where you go, you know, it changes as you go north, but then as you go south in Puget Sound, it is weird. So it may be that there's different parts more so than there are for other species, just based on that.
Right.
So, and then of course, I always get weirded out and confused when it's the Southern Hemisphere seasons because I have to, it's all backwards. But it seemed like one of them was talking about like our seasons, and then the other one was talking about
right. That's what I was going to say. That's very, it's confusing.
Yeah. And then the only other thing is they found a couple places they reach sexual maturity at 1.55 meters for males and 1.6 meters for females. Again, they don't have ages because we have no idea how old they are. I could find nothing about.
Makes sense though. I mean, again, like if they're barely studied at all, the last thing you're going to know is how long they live.
Exactly. Like we've been studying harbor porpoises a lot more now. We still don't know how long they live, really. So that's what I have for their feeding and behavior and reproduction. So after a quick break, we'll get into the status and threats, and then some cool new research that will link back to what we've been talking about. So
very excited.
Yes, we will be back after a quick break. And we're back. So, Kat, let's talk about what's happening with this population that we have no idea how big it is.
Right. We basically know nothing about them. Good question. So the Burmeisters porpoise are currently listed as near threatened by the IUCN, as I mentioned earlier. And so they were originally listed as data deficient, and they actually technically still are also listed as data deficient. So usually those are two different categories within the IUCN, where we simply don't know enough to know anything about how threatened or not threatened they are.
Right, because they won't even say if they're threatened or not, because they'll just say it's data deficient.
Right, because they have no idea. With these guys, due to the recent declines in their populations, we do know that they are under threat. And so I think because of that, they had to acknowledge, like, we don't know enough, but we know that they are currently, at least as far as we can tell, being hunted to the point where they are being threatened. So a little bit of a confusing one, but kind of makes sense now that we've gone into like how little we know, but we know little bits and pieces. So I thought that was actually kind of cool that they included both of those. But yes, technically their listing is near threatened. And as I mentioned, it is thought that the Peruvian population of Burmeister's porpoise may actually be more isolated than the other populations and therefore a greater risk. They are apparently genetically more distinct than in other areas. So it seems like maybe they're not outbreeding, or maybe this is kind of like the Black Sea harbor porpoise, that they are potentially even there was talk of like even potentially having them listed as a subspecies or a different species. So again, it does just indicate that there are these potentially pocketed populations that are more threatened or more at risk of extinction than others.
So I'm going to go ahead and throw in here, because you just touched on one of the new papers, the new research that I was
Oh,
talking
perfect.
about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of fill in on that.
Yeah.
So they did the genetic differentiation with, which is interesting, nuclear and mitochondrial DNA.
Okay.
So being able to do both is pretty interesting. You're not just looking at the mother line, you're looking at all of it. And they caught them either incidentally or directly caught from Peru, Chile, and Argentine waters. And they said there was major population differentiation in that South American Pacific coast. And Peru was much different than the Chilean and the Argentine dolphins. And that, like you said, they should be considered maybe as an isolated stock. And it's that population boundary is consistent with the population structure found in the sympatric dusky dolphin, which is very interesting. Yeah, okay. So there must be some line there that makes, like, you don't cross the line for any species that are there. And the as you mentioned, the Peruvian one is due to the high exploitation levels, which I'm sure you were going to get into. But it's basically just that study strengthens, like, these guys are isolated and they are have more intense threats. And they did look at that difference between the Atlantic and Pacific, but it wasn't obvious. It actually didn't show it in the structure. But they were like, it's a small sample size, so they need bigger sample size. And what's really interesting is the Peruvian ones, they were even different within the different harbors that they looked at.
Wow.
Yeah, so even more fine scale than even just Peruvian versus the other ones.
Interesting. I wonder how far apart the different harbors were that they were looking at.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. I didn't get too deep into that paper, but it basically shows you, like, maybe there are even more local populations, and that gets into that whole, you need to understand the population structure before you say what a stock is. You know, do you have these small little communities that don't really mix? Like, that's important to understand. So yeah, I thought that was
fascinating.
Yeah, so it connected there. I like that. So
yeah, no, that was perfect timing. And actually that segues nicely into the threats. So let's get into it.
I mean, not yay for threats.
Right. It's always the weird part. So as we've alluded to multiple times now, active hunting is a huge issue for Burmeister's porpoise. So these guys historically and currently are hunted for their meat predominantly. So it's used for bait and also for human consumption throughout their range, particularly in parts of southern Chile and Peru. It's especially common. So I did read that I think in certain locations they preferentially use it as crab bait, and other areas they specifically use it as bait for, I think, squid.
I saw crab a lot.
Yeah, I think it depends on, like, the location and just probably what the predominant fishery is in that specific location.
And we talked about this before in another one. We were talking about these animals being used as that, and it's like, crabs don't eat porpoises, so, like, why is it such a good?
I mean, I guess they might if there's a dead porpoise in the water column. I'm sure they would actually chew on it, but
they're not out there like fighting for porpoises.
Right. Epic, I mean, presumably it's been somewhat successful if they continue to use it as bait, but also like I said, I did think it was interesting that it was also used for human consumption. So this has been a huge issue. Again, like, this is still going on. This is not just, I know in certain areas they've, I think, ceased using it as bait, at least. Since, like, I think it was like the 1990s, they did stop using it as bait in certain areas. But because we know that this is the main threat for these guys, I think that's, again, what kind of led to that IUCN listing as near threatened, because we know that they are still being actively taken. It's not just like, we don't know how many there are, and they're just dying of natural causes, or like the odd thing here or there. It's like, no, they're being actively hunted pretty regularly, is what it seems, which I find fascinating given how little scientifically we know about their distribution and how many there are. And, like, if you talk to the fishermen, I'm sure they could tell you way more than we know about these guys.
Yeah. If we could use that information versus fighting with it, it would be a lot better. Which actually I'll talk about combination of research and fishing vessels in my new research, so that'll connect later too.
Oh, interesting. Okay, cool. Because the next one I have is those fisheries interactions. So again, we've talked about this with other porpoise species, being smaller, particularly feeding on a lot of the same fish that the fishermen are themselves targeting. Bycatch is pretty common. Again, an ongoing threat for these porpoises. So I did read one thing that it said the annual estimated bycatch is largest in Peru at about 2,000 individuals. So that's every year about 2,000 Burmeister's porpoise are bycaught, and that's just the ones that are reported.
Yeah. Yes,
So
which is the low number.
right.
Then.
So that's one location. So I mean, again, this is where it's a little bit at odds with the population estimate, right?
I'm
Where
about
it's
to
like,
say,
oh,
we said
about
500. Like,
right. And again, I don't know when that number was from. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if that's the most recent number, if that's from like 10 years ago, that it was around 2,000 individuals they were taking or they were bycatching annually.
Right.
But again, it just goes to show that like these guys are really they're kind of up against it out there,
Mhm.
and there it seems like there are a lot of animals that are being actively killed, unfortunately, or unintentionally killed.
Right.
And so really does just kind of go into like the more we can learn about them and their populations and where they are, the more we can potentially take action to protect them.
Right.
And the last one I'll mention for threats is, of course, climate change. So, of course, long-term climate change is a factor, but these guys also seem to be very sensitive to El Nino and La Nina events. Did note that, again, this is food related, right? So in severe El Nino events, the Humboldt Current, which apparently brings in all the anchovies to the area, gets disrupted. So that actually gets kind of rerouted due to the temperature differences in the water. And that means that a lot of the food sources for both the Burmeister's porpoise and other marine mammals in the area plummets.
Mm-hmm.
So apparently in 1997, there was an El Nino event that corresponded to quite a few Burmeister's porpoise stranding on Peruvian beaches, and they were, I guess, at the time found to be malnourished. So just, yes, long-term climate change is, of course, a factor for these guys, but also being slightly more sensitive to those short-term oscillations as well.
Yeah, and I did see somewhere they had one of the reasons I think that Peru was even more they were in more threat there was because of the fishing stuff, but also that climate change part of it, that Humboldt Current really affects that area pretty strongly.
Right, and exactly. So that's a good point, right? Like the impact that different populations would have because of that might vary depending on their location within their range.
Exactly.
So yep,
cool.
Those are the threats.
So my new research, there was surprisingly a fair amount, and it has a lot to do with the fishing and the bycatch, and because that is their biggest threat. But what's interesting is that they're using the fishermen in the research. So the first paper I have is from 2018, distribution and habitat use of a cryptic small cetacean, the Burmeister's porpoise, monitored from a small scale fishery platform. So they're actually out on the small scale fishing boat. So they use passive acoustics. They use sea pods from 2009 to 2012. And just listened for the porpoises. And so they found, again, shallow water, less than 200-meter depth, cooler, 17 to 18 degrees, and close to shore, less than 50 kilometers. There was a positive correlation between the likelihood of bycatch event and the acoustic presence of both dolphins and porpoises. So they looked at dolphins as well. So basically, like, it's more likely you're going to bycatch them if they're around there feeding, which makes sense.
Shocker.
Right. But they also found them in neritic water, so more open ocean, up to 200 meters depth and over 100 kilometers from shore. So again, they go farther offshore. They like to go to shore, but there's reasons for them to go off there. And this study was important because it showed that the passive acoustics and the small scale fisheries, working together, can provide data on distribution and habitat use with a low cost and is suitable in regions with low monitoring effort and high fishing pressure. So if the fishing boats are probably going to be out where those animals are, then it would be good to be able to utilize that. So that was a nice thing of working together versus working against each other. And then on that, they showed that another study in 2019 showed that pingers reduced the activity of Burmeister's porpoises around small-scale gill nets. So they looked at, and this is Peruvian small-scale drift net fleet over 4 years, and they use sea pods. Again, those shallow habitat of cooler waters, shallow waters. The use of pingers led to an 86% reduction in porpoise activity around the nets. So that's huge. Wow. So that could really reduce mortality. And again, also shows the potential of using passive acoustics to determine the effectiveness of bycatch mitigation. So are the rules that you're in place saying, like, hey, put pingers on there, you can actually see if it's changing their behavior and reducing the likelihood that they're going to get caught. And this is especially good for those places where their animals are really hard to see and document. And where getting statistically meaningful bycatch rates is logistically challenging. So like you said, like the amount that we're actually bycatching is going to be probably more than what we're actually reporting.
Right.
So this can help with in areas like that where it's hard to get that information. Along with the extended ranges, there was one in 2019 that was the first record of the Burmeister's porpoise in the Falkland Islands.
I saw that.
Yeah.
Isn't that thing
crazy? So, and what's interesting is that, you know, it's like South America, and then you have the Falkland Islands over here, and it wasn't even the west side; it was the east side of the Falkland Islands.
Wow.
So it went all the way across. So it was an adult male that stranded on the eastern coast in June 2019, and unfortunately, the carcass was removed before anybody could get to it. But there were pictures, and it was definitely a Burmeister's porpoise. And so it confirms that there's a 6th range state. So the other 5 were Peru, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil that we know they are. Also, we've now seen them in the Falkland Islands. And this expands the distribution range from a previous nearest occurrence was the Tierra del Fuego. So that's the Falkland Islands are 600 kilometers across the Patagonian shelf. That's huge.
Wow.
But the shelf is shallow, right? So it's less than 200 meters deep. So it's suitable habitat for them, kind of all the way across.
Right. I'm just wondering, I'm so curious if like, was that always part of the range and they just weren't observed out there? Or are they now like branching out?
So that's exactly the question, right? Yeah. So they're like, they're like, well, it could have been a strand, you know, one that died and just washed in, but because it was all the way to the east side, it was a fresh carcass. So it doesn't seem like it had died farther out and then, you know, comes or whatever. So it does seem that it's more likely that that animal went there, but was it the weirdo that just happened to go up the river? You know, I'm going to go on a walkabout and go 600 kilometers this way. And they also did note that the waters around the Falkland Islands are not conducive to spotting these guys.
So, well, that's what I'm thinking, because that's pretty gnarly water down there. So it's like, how many people are observing? How many people are able to see anything out there when they're, I mean, especially a Burmeister's porpoise?
Yeah. Well, and this is like sub-Antarctic waters, right? So it's like it's not pretty down here. I mean,
it gets pretty stormy.
Yeah. So it may just be that this is part of their normal range, and it's unlikely. It's also like there may have been more strandings, but there's not that many people on the east side of the Falkland Islands, and they may just get eaten right away. Like one, I think it was in that paper, they said one stranded, and within 64, before the people could get out there, like 64 hours later, so like 3-ish days, something like that, it was completely eaten. It was just a skeleton in the flukes. So if things are stranding, it's likely that they're going to be gone before anybody sees them. So I thought that was very interesting. So it's like, we really don't know. Do they go all the way across the Patagonian shelf? Is it like, you know, it's very exciting. So then another exciting thing was an unusually large aggregation of Burmeister's porpoises off Peru. This was in 2002, and they had 150 porpoises.
Wow.
So kind of like our big, large groupings that we see here sometimes, the harbor porpoises. So range of 100 to 200 near Isla Guanape Sur off the north central Peruvian coast. In September 2001, there were mothers and calves. There was another group of 40 that were nearby that was likely connected because they were basically doing the same thing and it wasn't too far away. The only other large grouping that they had documented was from the Bay of Mejillones in northern Chile in 1982. So very rare to see these large aggregations, although it's very rare to see them at all. So
right. So even cooler.
Yeah. But they were in subgroups of like 1 to 5 individuals traveling south on parallel track lines. So they were all together, but like in smaller subgroups, and widely dispersed over half a nautical mile on each side of the boat. So again, they don't do it. And they did see this in the neritic habitat. So this was more open water. And what's really interesting, going back to the threats, is that the fishermen were prepared to set a gill net in order to catch them. So they were like, oh, there's a whole bunch of these guys. We're going to put out to specifically catch them. But the author of the study was on the boat and dissuaded them by telling them it would be illegal and you shouldn't do that. But it shows that the direct takes may be more of an issue than they previously thought, like you had mentioned earlier. So, and that was, again, just in 2002. So I mean,
like 10 years ago.
20
years ago. I can do math.
That's okay. I think the 80s is still like 30 years ago. So it's fine. So anyway, but that's still relatively recent that they were like, oh, we're just going to take them. Then the last one I have was a short note about them off the northern coast of Peru. And I think there is more research in Peru because of that higher threat to them. Maybe it's easier to study them there versus more south. Right. They had higher counts of porpoises in the cooler months, again, July, that winter time for them, groups of 1, 2, or 3. They increased in occurrence when the cold waters are prevalent during the upwelling peaks in that austral winter, July to September. So again, linking back to what you said. And so that makes the conditions for anchovy very ideal. So again, it went with another study that showed that cooler waters at 17 to 18 degree waters in the winter months is the best. And they saw reduced sightings in March, which may be due to mating and parturition. If they're having babies, then they're less likely to be seen, which is kind of what we see here with our porpoises, right? They kind of disappear and then they show up with babies. So, right. So again, those sightings and seasonality may have to do with feeding and also reproduction. So there's some cooler stuff going on, and passive acoustics is a really big one for them because they are so hard to see. So it's great that these sea pods can be used to help determine who's there, where they are, when they're there, and how we can reduce the intentional and unintentional killing of these animals.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's all I had for my current research. I do have a couple of fun facts that go with that were new research, but I didn't have too much to say about them except that, hey, this is the thing. So I was gonna leave them for fun facts. So I'll let you start with the names, because the names are always so fun.
Okay, cool. So yeah, you guys might have been wondering this entire time, why the heck are they called Burmeister's porpoise? Yes. Like, that's kind of a weird choice of a name for a porpoise. So they were in fact named after Herman Burmeister, who first identified the species in 1865.
That's crazy.
That's a really long time ago.
Especially for how hard these are to see.
I know. It just makes me wonder if it's like a lot of them where maybe they were more prevalent at that time too, where it's true. If they were in greater numbers, or I mean, again, also different times using different vessels and all that kind of stuff. But anywho, so that they're named after him. Their Latin name, this is so fun. Their Latin name is Phocina spinipinnis, meaning spiny porpoise. So we come back to the tubercles.
Yes.
And apparently locally is known as Mariposa espinosa, which is thorny porpoise.
Yep.
Or Marsopa, I think, actually. Marsopa espinosa, thorny porpoise, and also Chancho marino, which is sea pig.
Sea pig?
Oh, so which is funny because harbor porpoises are known as puffing pigs.
Right.
Yeah, so exactly.
Poor porpoises.
And then, right. And apparently they were also for a long time known as black porpoises. And that is because, so first of all, like I said, they can be dark gray to, looking black at times. But apparently when they die, they turn black almost immediately.
That's crazy.
And so almost all the individuals that they were finding were already dead. And so they're like, well, these animals must just be black.
That's crazy. So how do you you see them in the wild and they go, that's a different thing because it's not.
But with their weird fin, you'd be able to know, but that's the same as the weird fin. And probably over time, once they actually were maybe the individuals looking at them were then hunting them potentially, or I'm sure they had some
they talk to the fishermen and say like, oh, when we caught them, they were gray, and then they immediately turn black.
Right, exactly. Like, oh, those guys look different until we brought them in, and then but apparently it's within minutes of dying they'll turn black.
So that reminds me, if you've ever caught a mahi, which is a delicious whitefish. But they're this beautiful yellow and green color, but then as soon as you catch them, like within minutes, it just goes away.
It's the same as I believe is it the sailfish that does the same thing? I think where they're like incredible, like iridescent, and they just turn it's like
you turn the light out,
it just disappears.
Yeah,
it's really sad. But anyway, so that led to one of their more common names for a long time was they were known as black porpoise.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I have one. Is that all your?
That's it. That's it.
Okay. Yeah. So I found one, and it was this was a local website for the marine mammals in that area in South America. I think it might have been in Peru, but they were talking about how difficult they are to observe, and they called them phantoms of the sea.
Oh, I love it.
I know, right?
I love it. There's so many cool. I think these guys have the biggest number of cool names for porpoises so far.
Yeah.
Like these are all really cool names.
Yeah. But anyway, they're phantoms. I love it.
Wow. That's awesome. Very dramatic.
So I have, let's see, we already talked about the genetic differentiation of the populations, but so the couple, just kind of interesting, odd, new papers. Yeah, factoids. There's one in 2017, and this, I read the abstract and I'm like, oh my God, let me just read the last sentence because I don't know what you just said because it's all technical names. It was the choroid plexus cyst in the neonatal Burmeister's porpoise. And so basically what I'm just going to tell you, because that whole thing was like, it was a, it does all the pathology. So I'm like, I don't need all the words. I'm like, okay, I know what most of that kind of is, but it's the first evidence of a neuroepithelial cyst. So on the epithelium, the outside skin part of, not skin, but outside part of the, I guess a neuron or some kind of nerve tissue. First evidence of a neuroepithelial cyst in a cetacean species.
Wow.
Yeah. So apparently they're not very common at all. And then we really haven't ever seen one in a cetacean. And it was neonatal, and the cause of death was a shark trauma. Yeah.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So again, there's that thing that these happen all the time. We just don't see them because we don't, cut up porpoises all the time.
Or they just don't make it, and then as happens.
Right. Or is this, rare? So that was interesting. That was in 2015. Then in the other direction of the porpoise, there's genital warts. They apparently get genital warts, and that's really all I put as the sub part for that. I said they get genital warts because it went into it went into the evolution of like how related this virus is to that virus.
Right? Is it the same as the same one that humans get, or not?
Exactly.
Is it totally different?
Yeah. So this is the Phocina spinapinis papillomavirus type.
Wow.
And evidence for a second distantly related one. So
how fascinating.
2 different ones found in the same in these animals. So that was interesting. And the last one is kind of cool. It was the first description of a Burmeister porpoise electrocardiogram. So, and this was actually on a wild juvenile female. It was temporarily held in captivity for rehabilitation. So there is in Mar de Plata Aquarium in Argentina. So I guess there is one that they can take these animals to rehabilitate, which I thought was cool.
It's really cool.
And they did ECGs on them, and it reported the amplitude and duration of measurements of a potentially healthy specimen, which represents the starting point for the determination of normal ECG values for the species, right? So you have to have that baseline before you can know what's right or wrong. They documented that the ECG was a valuable non-invasive tool for cetaceans' cardiac health assessment.
That's really neat.
Yeah. So learning new things about these phantoms of the sea.
Right. I like it.
Love it. So unless you have any other fun facts, I think that's all I have.
Nope, that was it.
Awesome. Well, I had a lot of fun with this one because they're really cool, even though we don't know a whole lot about them.
Yeah.
So we hope you guys had fun as well. Next episode, we'll probably be back to another journal review. So again, if you have one paper or something or topic that you want us to talk about, please let us know. Also, make sure you follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And in about a month, we'll have another marine mammal highlight poll, so you can choose. Maybe we'll put the Waddell seal back up, or maybe not. We'll see. We'll see where our thoughts take us. And then also make sure to check out our website. We have some up and coming new merch that we're going to be getting out hopefully soon. We got some awesome new designs from one of our supporters and volunteers that does great design work. So we're really excited to get those out. So keep your eye on the social media and also our website for that. And in the meantime, we do have merch and stuffed animals and stuff on the website. So please check that out. And remember to like and share with anybody you think would be interested. And we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
This was brought to you by Pacific Mammal Research, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. To learn more about the species we discuss, check out our blog. Head to our website, www.pacmam.org, that's PACMAM.org, to check it out. Also, help us continue providing fun and educational content like this by donating today. Your help is how we can continue to do our work and share it with you. Thanks.